All right, well, as folks continue to join us, we will just go ahead and get started and introduce our panelists and the topic of today's webinar. So really appreciate everyone joining. We are today going to be focusing on designing opportunity zones initiatives that benefit underserved residents. And Rachel and I are really pleased to have with us Anthony Miles from TPP Capital Holdings and Martin Wodo from Sola Impact. And to hear from both of them about their really innovative, fantastic initiatives, particularly designed in mind to benefit underserved residents in the communities that they are serving. Just a couple of kind of housekeeping notes to start us off. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing a recap of the webinar along with the recording and the slide deck afterward on our website, and we'll circulate all of that information to all registrants and attendees as well. So you will get that information within the next week or two. We are also welcoming of your questions throughout the webinar and presentations. Please use the Q&A box. It's just a little easier for us to track, and so we don't miss your questions among other kind of chatter throughout the webinar, which we also welcome. But please input your questions in the Q&A, and we will aim to get to that at the end of the presentations, and also may try to address some of those throughout the webinar as well. I think that is all the housekeeping to note, so we'll go ahead and go through the agenda. We'll start off with opportunity zones, updates, and resources that I'll provide momentarily, and then we'll be talking about OZ initiatives, again, intentionally designed to benefit Black and Latinx residents in communities across the country. We'll talk through the critical components of these initiatives, anticipated positive outcomes of these initiatives, how OZ financing is enhancing these efforts, and then finally insights on how to support or launch similar efforts, and how this can be scaled potentially in the communities that you all are working in. So we'll start with some updates and resources. So a couple of recent stories that are notable and also on topic. Arcterra's Impact Investors recently announced that it completed its Opportunity Zone investment in SNK Holdings. It will expand access to quality home healthcare, particularly in the Western Pennsylvania areas, in Pittsburgh especially. So SNK Holdings is the owner of the Family Choice Healthcare Company. It's a personal care services for both the elderly and disabled. And in partnership with Erie Insurance and the Mellon Foundation, it's expanding its footprint within Allegheny County, as well as other parts of Western Pennsylvania. This is a Black-owned business, and it will create about 600 jobs in total and about 325 jobs in Pittsburgh particularly. And these jobs are often kind of recruited and provide certified kind of healthcare training to residents of kind of urban centers, and provide really fantastic kind of full suite of benefits type, high earning jobs to folks in these communities. So we're really excited to see some of the continuation of Arcterra's great work, and more coming from there and in the Western Pennsylvania area. The second story is about how an entrepreneur is using retired recycled shipping containers to build sustainable housing in the kind of Atlanta region. It's a great interview there about Evo Opportunity Fund. They reiterate how their business model is such that they had already been working in these communities for years, and just happened that they now happen to be opportunity zones. I think you'll hear some of this kind of echoed in Martin's story too, that there's kind of a long-standing history of working in some of these places, and opportunity zones is kind of further just enhancing their existing work. They are, they see the benefits of opportunity zones being first and foremost bringing jobs to these places, but also beautification of some of these communities. He goes on to talk about the recycled storage containers and the solar energy systems that they're putting in place in these housing complexes that they're building, and how it's attracted both individual and institutional investors to these projects and to this fund, because they are driven by social impact. And so I think that's another important kind of point on the topic of kind of providing or changing kind of investor behavior and providing a forum in which for investors to kind of invest with social impact in mind. This is another example of that, and I think we'll be hearing more about that today from our guest speakers as well. On new resources, so EIG recently did some updating of our resources on our website. So we have some new fact sheets that are available to you all on investment activity, proposed legislative improvements rather, that we have recommended, and some of the socioeconomic characteristics of OZ communities. There's also some new resources from our friends at Opportunity Alabama and the Apex project that they are leading. And Rachel, by the way, I think is adding in the chat links to all of these recent stories and new resources as well. Finally, we have a recent webinar recap on government strategies for deploying federal funding in opportunity zones. That was our webinar last month. I think that was a great discussion. We heard from folks in California, Maryland, and Norfolk, Virginia about how they are working or leveraging the opportunity zones policy to complement some of the other federal funding and resources coming from the recent legislation to enhance their community and economic development work. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Rachel to take us through the rest of the agenda and introduce our guest speakers.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And I am, as always, very excited about this discussion, but I would say particularly excited about this discussion just because of what I would call the socioeconomic characteristics of opportunity zone communities and what we know about them and what we know about the level of need in those communities and who is actually residing in those communities. And so just to kind of kick off the discussion, one thing that we do know is that 57% of OZ residents identify as a minority, and that's compared to 39% nationally. And so opportunity zones have a disproportionate number of Black residents, Latinx residents, and other minority residents that we know that we need to benefit as we are deploying the policy and the financing tied to it if we are hoping to achieve the policy outcome and goals of opportunity zones. And so, we also know that 70% of OZs qualified as severely distressed. So that indicates a high level of need in those communities. We know that the average OZ poverty rate is 26% or just a little bit over 26%, and that's nearly twice the national average. And so high levels of poverty in opportunity zones, especially when it comes to children. 37% of children living in opportunity zones live in poverty, and the family median income is much lower than the national average. Joblessness is higher than the national average. So as you go through all of these facts and statistics, you just see that there's a high level of need in these communities. One of the facts or data that always strikes me is that average life expectancy of OZ residents is nearly 3.5 years shorter than the national average, and that was pre-pandemic. And so as we're thinking about how do we meet the needs of residents using this policy tool, we wanted to have this discussion with Anthony and Martin about how they're doing it, and hoping that creates some discussion, some creative thinking amongst other stakeholders out there around how you say, I am intentionally designing an opportunity zone strategy that benefits minority residents living in these communities, because we know that often they are the highest need residents in those communities, as opposed to maybe just saying, I'm investing in opportunity zones, I'm hoping to achieve high impact, we'll measure it, we'll see, and we hope that the benefits trickle down to residents. These are initiatives that are directly designed to help often historically underrepresented and underserved residents living in those communities. So with that, I want to introduce our first guest speaker, Anthony Miles from TPP. If folks haven't heard of TPP yet, I have been following their work for the past year or so. Just so excited to get them on the webinar today to share more. But they are a Black-led social impact private equity fund manager, and they also develop real estate. So they specifically real estate having to do with the healthcare industry. They're based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they're going to talk today about an initiative in the Tioga neighborhood, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, of Philadelphia. And really what they're hoping to do with this specific project is to change the face of Black health by investing in and transforming as many as 5 urban, blighted, and underserved Black neighborhoods. And they want to create scalable, compact, dense, community health and wellness-centric focused districts over the next decade. And so really this is community transformation specifically targeted to the current population of these communities, and investment that is meant to uplift their neighborhood as well as improve their long-term health outcomes. So with that, Anthony, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Excited to be here along with my panelist, Martin. We're on different sides of the coast. So let me just give you the backstory on TPP and what we embarked to do. Everything that we're doing now with the Tioga neighborhood is a progression of what we've done in the past, but now we're able to do it at scale, and more importantly, with the assistance of the opportunity zones, even makes it even better. So we set out to do this project way before the opportunity zones was even in effect. So I was just giving you the backstory on what we were up against when we looked at the Tioga neighborhood as a once in a generation opportunity to make a legacy impact for our group. The Tioga neighborhood hasn't had any investment in the last 60 years. The neighborhood was the best case scenario for us, but the worst case scenario for the current residents, meaning that the Tioga neighborhood had the worst health disparities in all of Philadelphia. It had the highest degree of diabetes, the highest high blood pressure, hypertension, obesity, the lowest medium income in the city at $17,000 a year. It had the worst infrastructure, crumbling sidewalks, streets, about 800 vacant lots, which was really, really bad conditions for the residents. And every article that come out about Philadelphia neighborhoods always use Tioga to compare it to other neighborhoods in Philadelphia that was in the same condition years ago, in the past 7 to 10 years, that have showed tremendous promise, but Tioga was still in the same condition. So the first thing that we had to do when we went to the neighborhood is to really understand the assets that the neighborhood had, which was transit. It's the most transit-oriented neighborhood in Philadelphia. There's 2 blocks to the south, there's an Amtrak station that will be undergoing a renovation to have a high-speed line to New York. There's 1 block over, there's a subway, 2 subway stops that go to Center City. And then you also have Temple University Health Science Campus, which has 7,000 employees, which straddle the neighborhood line. So you had that great infrastructure. And then the community had 3 plans that were created by city planning, a grant from an institution that did a plan. So when we went into the neighborhood, there were 3 plans already created. So we didn't have to try to really figure out what the community wanted. We just grabbed the plans and then decided. And after we got the plans, we had to figure out, we had to get site control over enough parcels to basically master plan out a whole neighborhood, which I'm going to go into very shortly. And the plans were very clear by the community. They didn't want any more low-income housing. They wanted market rate workforce housing for middle-income service workers. They wanted a senior housing village. They wanted a farmer's market instead of a grocery store. They wanted a medical clinic, and they wanted trees and open space. So the easy job for us was just, after we got the plan, was just to make sure we had enough site control to implement the plan. And then we layered it on top of it with our knowledge of food and healthcare. So this is a rendering of that you see in front of you of the district as we visualize it. Rachel, can you go to the next slide? So this is our 4 principles. We've all been working together. Clinton Bush is my biological brother. We've been working together for 40 years. Alexis is my daughter. Alexis has been with us for 13 years. And Doris Harris is our business partner. And Doris has been with us for 16 years. And each of us bring a diverse experience to the project. Clinton is a nationally renowned leader and thought leader in food as medicine. And Alexis is very talented at social impact. And Doris is our zoning and land use expert who works with our team to make sure our projects move along. Next slide. So this is the Temple University Health Sciences campus, which is a 3-block campus, which include the Temple Hospital, Shriners Children's Hospital, the medical schools there, the dental schools there. So we have a huge infrastructure of employees who work in the area that could actually help as an economic stimulus for the area by going into the area and spending some of their disposable income in this neighborhood, as well as to live in the neighborhood. So our project is a $300 million project, 5 city square blocks. It's a total area that we kind of carved out is 139 acres. It's all in an opportunity zone. And our project will consist of a mix of housing, entertainment, work, educational, and entrepreneurial opportunity. The district is officially certified and registered with the International Well Building Institute as the first well community certified neighborhood in a opportunity zone, and more importantly, in a Black, predominantly Black opportunity zone. Next. Now you'll get to see our actual catchment area is bigger than this, but what we have done is to make it digestible for investors and community stakeholders. We just kind of aggregate everything within this 5 city square block that you see in front of you as the initial area that we're starting development in. And as you see in the red, Stradlin Broad Street is the Temple University Health System, and everything you see to the left in blue is the area that we have 57 parcels, and then we just got a commitment. We got a commitment from the community and the city for another 30 city-owned parcels, which will bring up to 87 parcels, all within this 5 city square block area you see in blue. And the way the changes has to happen is at scale. So we're less than 10-minute subway ride to Center City. There's there's 10,980 medical faculty and employees. When you add the faculty, there's about close to 11,000 employees that work right in this area. So we're benefiting from having close proximity to this great infrastructure here. Next. Here's the timeline. We started acquiring the site control over the properties in 2015. We were still developing in another neighborhood to the south. So as we were developing, we started, acquiring these parcels with the 4 of our own money. So we put our own money in. This was before the opportunity zones, and then and also in 2017, we designed and secured zoning approval for 18 multifamily wellness projects, 2 residential preventative health facilities for seniors, and a smart neighborhood technology center and that was before COVID. We got our zoning approvals through. Everything in this neighborhood was zoned single family, which made it difficult for us, which means we had to spend extra money to take every single project through to get the zoning change. From 2019 to 2020, my brother and I designed and co-architected a 168,000 square foot state-of-art preventative health hub. And then we actually master planned the whole neighborhood out and tied everything together. And then in December 2020, we aligned with Delos in New York, which is an international wellness tech company, to provide healthy housing through their Darwin system, which includes air purification, water purification, and also sleep technology. And we're going to integrate that in all of our healthy housing units that we plan to build. And in November 2021, we'll have our groundbreaking ceremonies, and we'll start construction on our healthy housing for middle income service workers. Between $50,000 and $80,000. Next. Our 6 pillars that our neighborhood is the foundation. And this is a rendering of our community, youth, and corporate teaching kitchen inside our 168,000 square foot health hub. My brother and I designed, which is a national model, which is currently, we're in negotiations with adopting that model. A health system approached us and want to put that around several of their healthcare campuses. Our 6 pillars are healthcare, primary and specialty care. We believe that should be a right of all, and it should be in the community, like when I grew up, where we had a dentist and all of them in the community. This next pillar is wellness. We want to integrate that throughout the whole neighborhood, from yoga to fitness. One of our big ones is healthy food, fresh produce, and cooking classes. We have a 19,000 square foot indoor community farmers market, and that's what the community want, which will provide fresh produce to the neighborhood. We also have a 70,000 square foot indoor vertical farm that'll also be built across the street as part of the health hub. We have a smart neighborhood technology center. We believe in making sure that there's a commerce or a economic engine for the neighborhood. And we believe in smart neighborhood technology is the future. And we plan to train the residents on everything from installing Internet of Things devices, even to installing 5G. The next pillar is education, from preschool to PhD. So we're going to address the elementary school in the neighborhood and bring some resources to the elementary school, as well as we have a partnership with Pierce College, who signed on as an early stakeholder, and they're going to put a satellite campus in the neighborhood. And the next component is arts and culture. There's several murals already in the neighborhood that we plan on keeping, as well as part of our infrastructure funds that we got $10 million committed from the state of Pennsylvania. We plan to integrate public art when we plan to actually build out that infrastructure.
Anthony, I mean, this is just really amazing, because you're not talking about a project, a building. You're talking about comprehensive redevelopment of a micro community. And
Correct.
the way that you are planning everything out, it seems as if there's been so much community engagement to understand what the residents need, as well as what they want, which is often the same thing, but sometimes it's not. But, hoping to partner with state-of-the-art technology to help improve health outcomes. The location, just the proximity to Temple Hospital is, I think, going to be a real benefit for residents too. Without restating everything you just said, I'm just curious, how did opportunity zone financing either change your programming, change your approach, or help enhance it?
I don't necessarily know if it necessarily changed our approach. It enhanced our approach because we'd already planned before the opportunity zones came out to do this comprehensive social impact model that would be replicated in Philadelphia and other places for that matter. I think the opportunity zones, what it did for us is it just supercharged our project in the sense that now what happened is everybody was focusing on, we got everybody's attention. So it helped us to get people's attention because this was exactly what the legislation was meant to do. It wasn't meant to do one project at a time or for wealthy individuals to go into neighborhoods who were already on the uptick and just cherry pick projects. It was intended to have a measurable impact. And what it really did for us was, as a result of that, the support from various stakeholders was unimaginable, where we thought that we had to do really this heavy lifting. By the time we got to all the planning and it was done, everybody was like, what do you want from me? Or what do you want me to do? Or can I make an investment? And we're like, okay. And they're like, okay, what we would want to do is we want to lease 5,000 square feet. We'll sign the paperwork and we'll move our Center City division from Center City into here as an economic engine. So that's the kind of support that we got and the support that we continue to get.
That's awesome. And can you speak a little bit more, and it may be proprietary, but just to the extent possible, around other sources of financing, how you're staging capital investments, how you're stacking those other sources?
Yeah, it's multiple. It's with these type of projects, each project kind of like the way we've had to look at it, and initially it's kind of like you go out with a big project. Everybody doesn't want a small project, they want a big project. Then when you give them a big project, it's too big. So you're always kind of like, as Martin probably will tell you, you got to be nimble because, they say one thing, but when you ask them okay, now here it is, they don't want to put up the money. So each project, what we had to do is just break it apart, even though it's one. We had to break each individual project into pieces and kind of look at the capital stack on a project by project basis, which has been most effective. And outside of the only thing that we got as a lump sum holistically was our infrastructure money. We asked for $10 million. Initially, right off the bat, we was like, we need $10 million. They were like, what do you need it for? Look at the sidewalks. You got to walk in the street. There's the storm water. Look at this puddling up. So we were able to get that early, which is going to be huge for the project because that means I don't have to pay for it. So, and then the neighbors have even when I say neighbors, I mean the people who live there and the stakeholders, the people who work there, all have the same problem. They have to park and walk in a neighborhood with trash, mattresses, toilets, tires thrown. So in order to transform the neighborhood, all of that has to be changed. And we'll be able to do that with that, thanks to the state senator and the councilwoman and everybody else, that $10 million worth of infrastructure money.
Okay, so that was state funding or city funding?
No, that was state funding that we asked for, like as soon as before we even started the project, we showed took the political leaders up there and let them physically experience the sidewalks caving in. And it was hard for them to say no if the sidewalks, if they got to walk in the street too, they know we got a problem. So and we got that as a line item in the budget like a year ago, and now we're ready to draw down like half of it for phase one.
That's excellent. As you're talking, there's a few more questions that came in.
Yes.
So hoping you can stick around for Q&A.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn it over to Martin now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, Martin, I don't want to do too much of an intro on Sola Impact because I'm sure you're going to share plenty, but doing my job as a moderator, I just wanted everyone to know that Sola Impact is a family of social impact real estate funds with a double bottom line strategy focused on preserving, refreshing, and creating high quality, affordable housing in low income communities. And Martin, I would say that you guys are so much more than that, right? I watched you all through the pandemic, rally around your residents, support them, be able to be nimble, as Anthony said, but to meet their needs, whether it was kids that needed laptops to do online schooling or helping to fill out applications for government assistance. I just, first of all, want to note that you guys are so much more than just a real estate company, but also just really want to say that because it's illustrative of the fact that you can't just go in and develop. You have to be thoughtful. You have to be a community partner, and you have to have some of this capacity in place to help serve the residents that you're ultimately hoping to benefit. So now's your time to disagree with everything I just said, but from here.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for having me. I guess my first disclaimer is that I'm here somewhat reluctantly, and not because I don't love what we do and what EIG does, but I felt Sola was getting a little overexposed in the OZ space, but John Letary and Catherine and yourself challenged us to really continue to tell our story, and as much as the narrative has been mixed at some level about opportunity zones, I think that it is incumbent on all of us that are doing real work in communities that need it to continue to be vocal about it and reclaim some of that narrative. So with that disclaimer, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about Sola and what we do. I think many of you here may be familiar with parts of the story, but we raised our Opportunity Zone Fund in 2019. We raised $115 million. We are now in the throes of raising our fourth fund, which is a side-by-side OZ, non-OZ fund. I'll get to that in a second. We've primarily focused on, in our first three funds, on the broader South LA area. Broader South LA area is really a euphemism for South Central. This is a historically predominantly Black community, now 98% African American and Latinx. 2/3 of the population is low income. Among our tenants, the average income is less than $30,000. And so South Central, for those of you who may be familiar with its history, is probably one of the most notorious neighborhoods in the country. And I went to school in Philadelphia, so I'm quite familiar with the Philadelphia Temple area, and spent some time with Anthony in some of the work that he was doing as we considered looking at expanding into a couple of other cities. We decided to not do that, but really admire Anthony's work in Philadelphia in a similar vein. South Central is an area that has been overlooked and underinvested for over 30 years, and certainly the crack cocaine epidemic, the Bloods and the Crips, the LA riots have all sort of fed into this narrative of that this is a very tough neighborhood. As some have heard, because I happen to have grown up in West Africa, I was like, this is tough. It's not that tough. But that is the stereotype. And for those who say, look, opportunity zones really, and the investments went to areas that would have invested, folks would have invested in anyway, it's absolutely not true, right? They had over 30 years to invest in South Central. They still are not investing in South Central. We are by far the largest developer in South LA. We're the largest landlord with about 1,500 units that we acquired. And those units we acquired and fund our first, second, and third funds These were some of the toughest buildings on the toughest streets in South LA. And we went to work, rolled up our sleeves, and renovated about 50% of that, dealt with a lot of issues, are still dealing with some of the historical issues because we inherited the sins of the past. But for many, many years, the average age of our building stock is well over 75 years. And you can imagine all the deferred maintenance and deficiencies that went with that. And in that 1,500 units, we house almost 4,000 residents. And we really organize those activities, our activities, around 4, if not 5 pillars. The first is the benchmark, the bedrock of our business is affordable housing and providing high quality affordable housing in predominantly Black and brown areas in California. And that continues to be our focus. If you ask Californians, 90% of Californians believe that affordable housing and homelessness are among the most critical issues facing the state of California. Affordable housing and homelessness. And those are really two sides of the same coin. So you understand how critical it is to provide that. There's a tremendous number of statistics about, you know, the need for 500,000 affordable housing units just in Los Angeles alone, and 1.5 in the state of California. So again, the number of government programs that are, while well-intentioned, between LIHTC, new markets, tax credits, and everything else, you know, Triple H, number of government programs are still not solving and bridging that gap. And the truth is, we're probably still a drop in the bucket, but that is the bedrock of our business. But we really think about things much more holistically, and beyond access to affordable housing, we look at these other pillars, which are access to education, and particularly access to education in and through technology. We were very proud that this year we launched our, what we call our Tech YMCA, which provided 250 young people access to classes in coding, in video game development, and animation, and a bunch of things. And really, we've had from our inception a big focus on access to education, providing scholarships not only to our residents but to members of the community. And we're now on our 4th year of doing it, and we're able to raise and give out $250,000 worth of scholarships to young people going on to college education. The third pillar is access to capital, and for us that has really been embodied in our Beehive project, which is a 5-acre opportunity zone campus that we've been able to attract really entrepreneurial Black, women-owned, Latinx-owned businesses to the Beehive. We're about 60% leased at the Beehive, and 100% of our tenants are minority and LGBTQ businesses. And so that wasn't entirely by design. We hoped that would happen, but if Google or you know, Uber wanted to rent at the Beehive, we would allow them to as well. So it really, but the idea is to build an ecosystem of businesses and social enterprises that are competing and collaborating in the heart of South LA, and showing people what's possible there. And the fourth pillar is access to ownership. And for us, that is really two things. We're hoping to pilot a program in Pathways to Home Ownership, where we do a rent set aside. So a portion of our tenants' rent go towards a down payment for a home, provided they meet some fairly stringent conditions. They continue to pay rent on time. We would match that with a grant from the Black Impact Community Fund, and then another grant from a sister nonprofit. And ultimately, the tenants would be getting a 300% return. And based on our calculations over a 4-year, 5-year period, they could earn somewhere between $38,000 and $52,000 towards a down payment for a home. So access to ownership is critical. The other aspect to that, from our vantage point, is what we call at-cost homes. And so because we're a very vertically integrated company, we do acquisitions through development, through construction in-house. and we are building affordable housing multifamily units at $215,000 to $250,000 per door, based on whether there's parking, elevators, and some other parameters. But we believe sustainably we can build in California, in Los Angeles, quite frankly, at $225,000 a door, which is an order of magnitude less than most other traditional affordable housing developers. And we believe that we can take that expertise and know-how and apply it to building townhomes and condos for the community. And we would sell those at cost. And we think that we'll end up somewhere in the $350,000 to $400,000 range. We have a number of offers out. We may have a project in escrow, but we also will need to find a nonprofit partner in that initiative as well. So again, those are the 4 fundamental pillars of our value proposition. Increasingly, we are articulating something that we've done for a while, which is really taking this old housing stock and converting it to today's green standards. And as I said, our average building that we buy is over 70 years old. We rip up the walls and take out insulation, what is called insulation, but these are newspapers from 1947, right? And so it's unfortunate, but in low-income communities, these are often some of the biggest culprits that are very inefficient in terms of using energy. So really, that's the framework at which we look at the problem. If we go into the next page, the other thing that I will point out is, as someone who's been, we've been doing this for 10 years, but really in the last 3 years under the Opportunity Zone context. And so we had 2 funds before our OZ fund. And I often point out that despite some of the criticism, some of which is valid, candidly, but a lot of which is misdirected, the Opportunity Zone legislation did a number of things that were transformative in terms of allowing us to serve Black and Brown communities with intention and with impact. The first is that it forced that 10-year horizon. And I can't tell you the number of difficult discussions I had with my investors in Fund 1 and 2 to convince them to have a long-term perspective on their investment. And suddenly in our 3rd fund, which was our first Opportunity Zone fund, I didn't have to argue that way anymore. I was like, look, it's not me telling you that you should look at this as a 10-year hold. The government tells you, and there was no argument. So that was one thing that the OZ legislation did that was incredibly aligned, because these communities take time to develop and take time to really reach their full potential. The second thing that the OZ legislation did is it required that substantial improvement test, meaning that you had to double your basis during a fairly short period of time. And so in Fund 1 and Fund 2, we bought 1,500 units, over 150 buildings. It's exhausting to think back that we were buying, 6 to 10 buildings every month. But what we hadn't done when we analyzed really what was going on is we hadn't added 1 unit to the housing stock of Los Angeles, right? And that was because of the time frame, and that was because a lot of investors did not want to do ground up development. But because of the substantial improvement test, we could convince our investors to take on what they perceived as the risk of development. We do everything by right. We do not take entitlement risk. Because of a number of zoning legislation changes in LA over the last several years, we can build the density with the affordability in transit-oriented corridors in Los Angeles, so that we don't have to take the entitlement risk. But in Fund 3, we're going to end up adding about 1,500 brand new units to the housing stock, the majority of which will be covenanted affordable for up to 55 years. So effectively, no matter how we exit, the the future owners will have to abide by those covenants. And so that's been transformative. And in our fourth fund, which we have called the Black Impact Fund, we expect to add somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 units in the broader Southern California area. We're looking at Santa Ana and a number of other areas. And we're also looking at Northern California as well. So I think, and I think the third and final point I will make is that, because we now have a side-by-side OZ, non-OZ fund, obviously the Opportunity Zone Fund lends itself primarily to high net worth individuals and family offices, folks that have a need to take advantage of the tax benefit from the realization and deferment and avoidance of capital gains. But we are also talking to dozens of institutional investors. And that journey has been much more of a roller coaster, meaning that a lot of these large, foundation, pension funds, endowments look at what we do, focused on Black and brown communities, and all they see is risk, right? Just very candidly. I mean, I don't mean to be controversial, but the number of times we've been patted on the head and said, look, that's so incredible. We love what you're doing, but it feels a little too risky. And so, look, there is a institutional prove it again bias. And I think that when we look at the hard facts, I think Enterprise came out with a statistic that only less than 3% of capital in real estate has gone to Black-led funds. And I'm sure that the amount that has gone to Black-led funds that are investing in Black and brown communities is a fraction of that. And so that's the reality. We've been encouraged by several institutional investors that have chosen to come along on the journey with us. But I think I lay out sort of the very stark facts of both the pros and cons of the Opportunity Zone legislation. Let me go to the next page and let me do a quick time check, Rachel, because I sometimes get carried away. And I'll spend a little bit of time of what we did during COVID. So let me be clear about the fact is, while we lay out some examples of what we feel we did right, we're far from perfect. We're far from putting ourselves up on a pedestal. But I think that we share these to both provide examples of what can be done and what the Opportunity Zone community has a responsibility to do, right? We have been given an incredible gift that allows us to raise capital and provide our investors a tremendous tax advantage. We feel very strongly that the Opportunity Zone community as a whole, should be coalescing around certain areas where we can demonstrate how we're delivering impact to the community. These are some of the examples that I use and that we did during COVID. And very candidly, all of these indirectly and directly led to really good financial performance. Our social impact team, which is about 12 people strong, took every federal, state, and local program, cataloged them, and handheld our tenants through dozens of applications for rent relief, for eviction prevention, for loans, and other types of financial assistance. And we can point directly to over $400,000 that we handheld our tenants to, which ultimately helped them pay rent, right? So we didn't do it with any Machiavellian intent, but it directly and indirectly helped them pay rent and their other met their financial needs. We were doing food drives. We started out just a bunch of volunteers collecting food and hand delivering it to our tenants. And then the LA food banks heard about what we were doing and said, look, if we provide you the food, could you do the last mile delivery, which we were doing anyway. And so in some weeks we had up to 50 volunteers, both our employees, our contractors, architects, members of the communities, showing up every Thursday at 9 a.m. and we were delivering over 100 meals, 2 tons of food. It was free of charge to us. We were delivering it to our tenants that were homebound or had a declared health condition, right? And it grew from there. And we did a tech drive, and we did a Chromebook drive, and we did a Wi-Fi. We ultimately raised over $500,000. This says 481, but over $500,000 to deliver Chromebooks and free Wi-Fi to over 1,000 families. Over 1,000 families for almost 3 years. And, 95% of those families were not our residents. They were members of the community where we heard that their kids were struggling to keep up with remote learning, didn't have adequate technology, didn't have access, good internet access, were sharing a computer among a family of 5. So again, I share these are as practical examples, and we actually, talked to dozens of OZ funds during this period to join forces with us. Some politely declined, I won't mention any names, but really I think that the takeaway here is that we are still in the early innings of this. The new administration appears to be really evaluating it very closely. And it's incumbent on all of us to be vocal about what we're doing, how we're doing it. As I always say, we don't sign NDAs. We don't ask people to sign NDAs because we want others to beg, borrow, and steal our best ideas. And if they're replicating this in Philadelphia, and if they're replicating this in Tulsa, Oklahoma, hallelujah, right? And so again, with that spirit, I just wanted to share some of our lessons learned, and again, really pleased to be part of the EIG coalition, because John, Catherine, Rachel, and their team have been really shoulder to shoulder with us as we have been navigating the waters through these periods.
Thanks so much, Martin. Really amazing work. Before we move on to Q&A, which there have been a number of questions and just general comments in the chat function, which we love to see throughout the webinar, Catherine, can you go back one slide to the diagram? Martin, just for folks that may have missed it or didn't fully comprehend the model the first time around, because this is a very unique model, but I feel like it is replicable for folks who are mission aligned and actually want to execute this model. So can you just walk us through this one more time, as far as the 13% management fee and carry, and how that is both generated and then where it goes?
Sure. Our Opportunity Zone Fund, as our non-Opportunity Zone Fund, has a fairly classic 2 and 20 structure, meaning a 2% roughly asset management fee, a 20% carry. We've committed that 13% of our fees and carry would go to an affiliated nonprofit, which is called the Black Impact Community Fund. After years of trying to raise money for our nonprofit, I figured I suck at it, and I wanted to find a way to make it a lot more self-sufficient. At one point, we asked our investors to also commit 13% of their appreciation to the Black Impact Community Fund. And again, most of them patted us on the head and politely declined, and I'm okay with that, but we're gonna keep our end of the bargain. The reason we chose 13% is not to be cheeky about it, but 13% of the country is African American, and in some respects it's a acknowledgement of the 13th Amendment. So we felt that was the right number, and we ultimately believe that will help our affiliated nonprofit be self-sustaining and run many of these programs that go beyond what we can do within our for-profit operating company.
I love that. Thank you, Martin. Catherine, I think we're ready to go to Q&A. I know we have about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to hand it back over to you to help guide traffic on these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for 2 great presentations. To reiterate what Rachel said, there's a lot of just commentary, a lot of clapping emojis in the chat box. So obviously a lot of support from those who are participating for what you all are doing. I'm scrolling back up here toward the top when there's a couple of questions more for Anthony, but I think Martin, maybe you could speak to it as well. The first question is kind of what have been the top 3 kind of contributing factors to your success? For Anthony, in the context of, you know, given the fact that Tioga's systemic woes were entrenched for 60 years, but Martin, I think as you also described, you're facing similar, you know, a similar situation in South LA. So what have been some of these contributing factors to your success thus far? So maybe Anthony, if you want to start, and then Martin, you can add in anything as well.
I think the first contributing factor was the fact that we were, quite frankly, we were Black. We were Black real estate developers in the city. So I'm a real estate developer turned fund manager, and Martin's a fund manager. So we're kind of flip-flop, and then he does development. But so first of all, we was Black, and we were natives of North Philadelphia. So the residents connected and resonated with the fact that, you know, and then the second thing that contributed was our ability to be bilingual. So we can speak the residents' language, and then I can translate what the residents want to corporate America foundations, the politicians. So I think when you look at these opportunity zones, I think that that's one of the huge things that we found is that there's nobody on the local level that could properly take what they want and pitch it to the stakeholders. And that's why you have a Temple University that's in the neighborhood for 7-8 decades and did nothing for the community, the health system, because nobody in the neighborhood could go to them and say, look, while you're building this medical school, we need this, or we need support on this. And the last one was our ability and track record of knowing how to get site control and knowing how to develop the best and highest use, and our direct experience at getting zoning and use approval. So prior to this project, we got 100% track record of doing 60 to 80 projects in the city of getting zoning. So to us, it was, you know, that's a skill that we did not have to actually subcontract out. We did it ourselves, and the residents really appreciated it because we were, well, personally, I was the one that went to the community meetings and personally presented the projects to the community to make sure, number one, that they understood what we were doing, and 2, understood that what I was presenting to them is what they told us they wanted to do. And then they was holding only me and our group accountable, not a third party. So those would be the things that I would consider that 3 things that made us successful.
That's really great. Martin, if you wanted to add anything too from your experiences, please feel free. And then there's also a question, I think that might be kind of related, but applicable to your work about leasing for qualified opportunities on businesses. So give you a chance to talk maybe about the Beehive, if that's something of interest as well.
We are accepting leases. You know, I think the only condition is you can't have a triple net lease, which is a technicality of the opportunity zone legislation. But you know, we hoped, and I know EIG has done a lot of work in trying to facilitate operating businesses in opportunity zones, and that has been one of the awkward pieces of the legislation, and we hope, and I think that the EIG and other stakeholders have hoped that there would be more of an uptick. But we have several OZ businesses at the Beehive now, and we're you know, if you are interested, come on down. You know, to echo what you know, Anthony had spoken about, you know, number one, you've got to be a very good operator, if not a great operator, and I think that's the fundamental. We were very fortunate. We chose to be very vertically integrated. We have today 130 people managing about $400 million of AUM, which most people think is crazy. but we think is necessary to really do the type of work that we want to do. So number one is be a great operator. Number two is that, we keep the community as our true north and really try to ensure that we're engaging with the community and not listening too much to white papers and folks. Anthony made this point, which I think is a very profound one, which is if you speak to members of the community, they don't only want affordable housing. They want mixed use housing. And I often say that while the ivory tower white papers talk only about gentrification, but the opposite of gentrification is economic segregation, right? Which is all the poor folks are on one side of town. That doesn't work, right? And so you have to get beyond that narrative and really understand what the community members want. And they want retail, they want mixed use, they want to be able to see people from different socioeconomic areas and different socioeconomic levels interacting, because that allows their kids to deal with it, not only a plumber and a doorman, but to deal with a doctor, a lawyer, and an accountant. And that's to us what makes for incredibly dynamic and diverse communities. And I think the third thing is really being optimistic. And after a lot of the noise around George, the excitement in a good sense about George Floyd's the consequences, rather, the BLM movement, Black Lives Matter, diversity, inclusion. We felt that the country was poised for change. Some of that has retracted, but we are constantly optimistic and constantly sort of look at the world as glass half full, because despite many folks, seeing it as risky, there are organizations and institutional investors that really are committed. And you have to show up with that belief every day. So that, I think that the three characteristics that are important.
Yeah, and Catherine, I know we're about to close out. We're 2 minutes over. I just really want to underscore, there was a line on one of Martin's slides that says, better neighborhoods, same neighbors. And I feel like that's sort of the ethos, that's the embodiment, investment to create better neighborhoods, but without displacing, same neighbors, And with that, I think we can probably close it out, right, Catherine?
Yeah, thank you both so much for all of the inspiring work that you continue to do, for sharing it with us today. Just really excited to continue tracking what you all do in these communities. So thanks again for joining. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining as well. And as I said at the top, we'll circulate this recording, a recap of the webinar and the slide deck shortly to all registrants. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.